Your value is not determined by if you go to a coffee date or if you go to a dinner date or the job you have or the fact that you're single. Your value comes from who the fuck you are intrinsically, your core beliefs, and your value comes from your morals, ethos, and ethics. So if you don't stand for something, you fall for everything. Stop allowing other people to determine who the fuck you are. It is okay. You're going to lose people in life. You're not dating your mother or father. These are just random fucking people that you met on the internet. Get very comfortable disappointing people. My mama said you can please some of the people some of the time, but you cannot please all of the people all the time. You don't like everybody, so stop trying to get everyone to like you.
Well, welcome to the show, Sabrina Zohar. I'm so happy to have you on Passion, Love, Pursuit. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Erica. I'm super excited.
Yeah, I know we're going to get into a lot of juicy topics today, really around dating and what's limiting us from really having a healthy love life. And I'm sure a lot of people know this. Generally speaking, it is not somebody else. It is very often ourselves that are playing a part in this relationship dynamic and those things we run up against in dating. And so we're going to get into this a lot because this is your expertise. But first, I want to, before we dive into the trenches, I want to know really so first, a little background on you. So you became wildly popular as a dating coach because of your massive following on TikTok when you started sharing things. And then you launched your podcast, Do the Work, a little over a year ago, I believe. And it's always at the top of the charts. I've seen it many times. Like when I'm scrolling through, I'm like, there it is. So I've always noticed you being on the top of the charts, which is amazing. So I congratulate you on that. But I would love to know, what was the catalyst that led you into talking about dating advice and these type of topics? What set you on the path to do the work and then share it with others?
Totally. So, I mean, in probably true form of like my mom has always said, like necessity is the mother of invention. And so I think it was really the fact that I was that girl. I was the highly anxious, daddy issues, could not function. It was my sister met her partner at 19. And so I had this looming over of like, I'm the fuck up and there's something wrong with me. And I'm the only one that deals with this, because the reality was, like, as I was going on along my journey, there was nobody really, like, this was, social media wasn't really talking about that at the time. And it was for the last, I've been on my journey personally for 8 years, like since I started like therapy and really being like, okay, it's time for me to stop this bullshit and really start to understand what's going on. And so for me, my history is like, moved to New York when I was 19, like 19th birthday, went out to see my sister and never left. And I kind of say I grew up in New York because that's really where I learned how to become an adult and how to handle things. And it kicked my ass backwards and forwards of those 12 years. And that's where I learned to say fuck so much. And talk this fast. But for me, I went to school. I went to FIT. I first went to acting school when I moved to New York. And then I was like, I never really understood that playing a part for someone else wasn't what I was meant to do. I was meant to just be myself, but learned a lot of tools, really, really grateful for that experience. Then went to fashion school, worked in the fashion industry, would not wish that on my worst enemy. And in 2017, my mom went to the doctor with a headache and they found 6 brain aneurysms that grow to the top half of her vessel. And so she was given a 3 to 5% chance of even surviving. And so in that interim, that's when I started therapy. Like that's when I had kind of the first of many rock bottoms that I was going to hit of, wait a minute, like this can't. And like at the time, my now ex, who wasn't ex then, like he had broken up with me after a month and a half. And it was that moment where you're like, okay, there's got to be something here. Like, how does this keep happening? I don't understand. It's the same cycle over and over and over again. So I started therapy. My mom went through her whole thing. Thank God she survived. And I started my clothing company right after, software, and like kept on that journey, and then got back with my ex, the one that had broken up with me after a month and a half. And essentially I married my father, and I was with a raging narcissist who was incredibly verbally abusive and really, and like, who was I? Wildly anxious, super insecure, low self-esteem. Like we were the perfect storm. So I'll take accountability on my part and make him take accountability of his. And at that time is when I started therapy the day after we broke up. And like, he broke up with me. Like he left me on the floor crying hysterically and was like, fuck off, and left after, because I said something he didn't like, of course. And my mom came to visit, and I remember her saying, he's going to regret the day he told you to go to therapy, because you're going to finally see who he really was. And she wasn't wrong about that. And that started my journey. And now in that interim, while I've been on this journey of inner child meditations and ketamine treatments and tapping. And I've tried every modality, tried about 15 to no, about like 20 therapists at this point in the last 8 years until it's like dating. You got to find somebody that challenges you in the right ways, knows how to work with you in the ways that resonate. And in that interim, I started doing like lots of podcasts and panels and speaking out about my clothing company and the journey, but then also constantly revolving it around dating and saying, it's similar to dating like this. And people started to reach out to me just organically of like, hey, I'd love to be coached with you. Like, I really like the way you think. And I was like, cool. I never thought this was going to be a career. I'm still running my clothing line. Bring us to 2022 or 2021. I moved to LA, left New York, said it's time for something new. Really struggled in LA very heavily. Like it's not a place for me. And then in 2022, I was supposed to be on Shark Tank. So I spent 6 months of my life prepping for Shark Tank. I was on set, like, okay, Sabrina, hair, makeup, steamed after 11 hours of waiting. Like, you are next. This is your time. For them to come in 20 minutes later and say, I'm so sorry, we ran out of time today. And that was my meltdown. Like, I went home, I lost it. Like, it was one of the first times I had pretty dark thoughts. And luckily I had actually a guy I had one-on-one date with call me, and like we never saw each other again, but he was, to this day, I will thank him for supporting me through that and just allowing me to remember that like what goes down will come back up. And after that, I remember my friend was in town and she was like, man, you should really like at this is literally Shark Tank had ended twice. At that point, I was like, I'm done with this. Obviously software and doing Shark Tank isn't where I'm going to go. And I, to this day, could not be more grateful that did not work out, because I wouldn't be where I'm at now if I had pursued this other endeavor. And I would have just kept going with something that, as much as I love, of course, my clothing company, what I do now feels so right to me. And my friend came over and said, you know what? I love your advice. Every time you post on social, people love it. Why don't you start a TikTok? And I was like, you know what? Realistically, the reason I don't want to is because my own core limiting beliefs. I was like, I don't think anyone cares about me. Who am I? Why do I need to share what I am? Typical imposter syndrome of like, I don't matter and nobody cares about me. And I just started posting, and then that just started to take off. And then my dog passed away a month later, and that was the end of it for me. At that point, I was like, I need to make a change. It was 10 years of my best friend and literally the love of my life and my soulmate. And I lost myself. But in that losing myself, I just kind of surrendered. And I was like, okay, well, like the phoenix, I'll rise from the ashes. Like, it all has to burn for it to be rebuilt. And I broke up with the guy that I was seeing, who's just super avoidant. I was like, I'm done. I'm tired of all this. I came to San Diego with my mom to visit my sister. And I remember coming and I was like, I've never felt better. We're looking for apartments. Went on Hinge, met my partner 5 days later, and I really just surrendered. And then I started to focus on my socials. I started to focus on the podcast. And I think being authentic about the fact that, yeah, I have anxiety. Yeah, I struggled with this for a long time. Yeah, texting is really hard for me. Yes, all of these are a challenge, but it doesn't mean it needs to own you. And I think I finally created, it feels like, a community and a voice for people that felt like there was nobody else that got us. Because when I look online now, of course, after I got fucking ripped a new one for saying certain things like about texting, now everybody's talking about it and saying, oh, you don't need to do that. But the reality was, for years, nobody was supporting somebody like me who was highly anxious. And it was, do this to get a guy. Cool. So that's just making my anxiety worse. You're fucked up if you have anxiety. Cool. So now I'm insecure about my anxiety. And there was just no tools. It was just a lot of speaking down to me and a lot of these influencers judging you for not being happy and not being fulfilled in life, but not also holding space to say, but you're also human and that's normal. You're going to have these experiences. So in a very long story, that's how my journey started, was me realizing that I think somebody else needed to speak up for people that just didn't have a representation.
Sabrina, I love it. I love your radical honesty and I love your vulnerability so much, because I think exactly as you just stated, that's why people resonate, because you're like, oh, you see me. I feel what you feel. Thank you for helping me understand it. And also not have shame around it, but yet the tools to resolve it possibly within them, to address things that are not serving them. And that's really what it is, like doing the work. And I love your podcast name, by the way, because it sums it all up. Sums it all up of doing the work on ourselves. Like, it's a journey. It's not a destination. It is a lifelong pursuit. That's why my podcast, like, I named it Pursuit, because I feel it's all these things. It's a pursuit through life. This is a journey. So, but I love, there's so much to unpack with that. So first of all, I think that, recognizing and being honest with yourself of like, I'm noticing this within myself. of how this is responding to things outside of me, and now turning the mirror on myself. How do I take responsibility for that and address it, but yet love myself and give myself grace through the process? I think that's what's really key, because I think, the only way we could heal is through a loving, nurturing way, I believe. But yes, it is taking that responsibility. So, okay, so just to unpack some of that, where besides the therapy, I imagine there's a lot more. As you said, you've done so many things in your healing journey, and you will probably continue to do more things in your healing journey. But what was the biggest catalyst to helping you recognize your patterning and also notice that you had these certain things that were coming up, and the anxiety and whatnot? I know you speak heavily, which we'll go into the attachment styles, but I would love to hear just what has your healing process been, and how did you start to recognize those things within yourself?
Totally. So for me, the catalyst was the breakup. Like when that last call of like, okay, it can't be everyone else. Like my sister always used to say, Sab, you're the common denominator. Like,
Yeah.
why are we? And I would always, you don't understand me and you don't get it. And I'm like, Jamie, you've never been ghosted. And it's like, oh, that's true. She's never experienced, thank God for her. She's been with her husband for 20 plus years. Like
Wow.
super, yeah, like they are couple goals, and you're like, okay. And like, to this day, I've told my sister and her husband, I'm like, without you guys, I would never have known what a healthy relationship looked like. I would never have known what a man showing up for a woman would look like, because my brother and my father both have completely abandoned me all of my life. My brother, not as intentionally, he was sent away to a drug program, and like all those things that we see now of those crazy programs, like that's what he went to. So there was its own trauma there. But as far as that, like, I think just really, it was just one day where I woke up and I literally, like, when that breakup happened, I remember calling my mom saying, like, I can't keep doing this anymore. And so the first step for me was therapy. I love it. That's not going to do it. Like, it's not just therapy that's going to, I've had people that have been in therapy for 20 years and they're still in a loop, because it's about the right therapist. And that's why I was very specific. Like, I started for me with tapping, and I loved tapping because it's a technique that allows you to say really painful things and thoughts and stuff, but you're hitting on acupressure points that help relax your nervous system. So you can start to build a callus. In doing that, I started to uncover a lot of those core beliefs of like, I'm just like, especially after my ex, when we broke up and he lived with me for 3 months. So I was constantly reminded of what was going on every day and my shortcomings. By being able to do the tapping, I remember, I'll never forget the one time I kept saying, I'm such a piece of shit. It's all my fault. And my therapist, when she was doing it with me, she was repeating it. And she's like, you're such a piece of shit. It's all your fault. And I'll never forget, I stopped and I said, but it can't all be my fault. And I remember her smiling and she was like, no, it can't all be your fault. And I was like, that's just the first step of neuroplasticity, introducing a new thought process of, but wait, how could this always be me? That opened the door. And once it opened, it was swinging. Then I started moving to, okay, I know I'm stuck somewhere. Like we did all the conscious surface level. Now we need to go deeper. And so for me to go deeper, I needed ketamine treatments. Not everybody needs that. I had really started to work on my meditation practice because I like visualization and started to really like work through that. But I needed to understand the ketamine treatments were, to me, the catalyst of what saved me. And the reason it did is because it brought me to inner child work. Sometimes I'll do a treatment like I'm going to do one this weekend, because I'm a human and I'm struggling with some imposter syndrome and I'm struggling with some stuff with my family. No one did anything. It's a me thing. I'm triggered. And I utilize this as, yay, I get to explore. I get to reconnect. It's really painful. Inner child work to me was what saved everything, because that part two was doing the inner child work. And like, I'm a big fan of IFS, which is internal family systems, and it's about our parts. So being able to say, okay, a part of me feels this. So it's not all of me. Okay, how old do I feel? I'm 7. I feel like I'm 7 years old. Okay, cool. Let's explore that. Then just the consciousness of that wasn't what helped. But really what started to do the trick for me with my anxiety was, which no one's going to like my answer, allowing myself to feel the feelings. Sitting in my body for 3 minutes and saying, feel it, let it happen. Don't try to fight it. You feel anxious right now? Feel it. What is the anxiety? Is it sadness? Is it fear? Usually it's a fear. Okay, what am I scared of? How can I reparent myself? But in conjunction, because just reparenting yourself and talking to yourself might not do it, but being able to really say, I'm going to allow myself to feel, because growing up, my dad would hit us. He would walk out. There was no space for me to have emotion. So I always felt like I was too much, with that mixed with, but I'm not enough. I'm too much because my dad can't handle my emotions. So he walks out. So I must not be good enough for him because he walks out on me. So being able to hold space for myself and say, but you're a human, you're allowed to feel. I validate your experience. I'm going to tell you that you're okay. And I'm going to be the parent we didn't have. And then sitting in it and saying, okay, I'm going to grow resistance. Doing an ice bath sucks until you're doing the ice bath. And then you're like, oh, I guess it's not that bad, right? I could do it. So sitting in that emotion for me was parallel and paramount, and then challenging my thoughts. Okay, let's use an example. Guy didn't text me. First thought would be, he doesn't like me. He's over me. Okay, cool. That's anxiety. That's fear. That's a fear driven. So I need him to text me and I need that versus he didn't text me. Okay, well, what's coming up for me? I'm feeling sad. Okay, sit with that sadness. Then after, I need to challenge my thoughts. What facts do I have to back up that this person didn't text me for a day equals they can't stand me and they hate me? I have no core. There are zero facts to back this up. What's a contrary belief? Maybe that person just doesn't resonate to texting. Okay, cool. I could talk to them about this. And I was able to then understand, wait a minute, I'm projecting my triggers onto you versus I'm now handling them and being able to say, is there a real threat? Or is there a perception of a threat that I now need to work on myself?
What you just shared, the last bit of challenging your thoughts instead of acting on them, I think that is part of really doing the work, because it takes us from the unconscious to the conscious and then not reacting to our triggers. And I think this is kind of a lifelong journey because we'll always be triggered. And sometimes I know recently, I think it was less than a year ago, I noticed one of the things I was triggered, and it happened to, I recognized after, by the way, of course, I reacted to the trigger. And then after I realized what that stemmed from, and I was able to connect the dots, and I'm like, oh, this is something I didn't realize was still affecting me in the present that happened years and years ago. And so with that awareness, then we could choose a different way and be more conscious the next time, if you want to say. And I think that's super duper key. But what's interesting, like I share some of the journey with you, meaning like I was in the fashion industry, highly stressed out, that whole process. My goodness, talk about putting stress in your life, but we won't talk about that anyways. And then I also, one of my biggest struggle and my biggest pain point, and also my most trauma, if you want to say, came from relationships. And so I went through this whole journey, and I so relate to a lot of the things you share, because I went through the journey of like, oh shit, I had this breaking moment where I'm like, I'm the common denominator in this problem. And, you have your friends, because girlfriends like to help you out. And they're like, oh, it's just him. He just doesn't want a relationship. He's not emotionally available, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, I think we need to take responsibility for the part we play in our life, that are part of our own misery and chaos. And we always play a part in that. And so recognizing and taking a look at ourselves and turning the mirror is so, so key, because if we want a different result, we need to change the pattern we keep on repeating. Like different present, or sorry, what is it? Same package, different bow. It's like, we'll keep, which I love that saying, because it's so true. It's like same dance, different song, right? So it's like, just so true.
Nothing changes if nothing changes. And it's like, you're right. Your friends are probably right. Hey, he's emotionally unavailable. He's not interested in a relationship. It's like, cool. That can absolutely be a truth. And you know what a conflicting reality could also be? Great. Then what are you doing allowing it? Because it's like, you're right. Absolutely. That person might be a fucking raging piece of shit. They might be a narcissist. They also might just be a really nice guy who maybe just doesn't like you in that way. Like, we don't always have to create a story and a narrative. And I think our friends try to do that to help us and say, oh, he's just this and blah, blah, blah. No girl's ever as good as you. And it's like, I don't need bullshit. I don't need you to coddle me and tell me, oh, he's never going to find a girl like you. And it's like, you're right, because there is only one of me. But you know what? Maybe they'll find a girl or a guy or a they, whoever we're talking to. That person might just be better for that person. Maybe that person, like, I'll tell you right now, I love my partner to the moon and back. Both of us have agreed. Is this like the craziest connection we've ever had? No, we've had sparks fly. That didn't mean that person was compatible for us. Right. We fit each other beautifully. We work together really well. We come together really well. That is worth its weight in gold, more than, oh, well, we have great sex and we have this crazy chemistry. And it's like, yeah, but you trigger each other like hell. Yeah. And you are a nice constant reminder of the shit this person dealt with. And maybe they met somebody else who didn't trigger them like that. And so instead of always creating this narrative, sometimes we do just have to acknowledge that person's unavailable. Great. What does that say about me that I've been trying so hard to get them to pick me?
I think honestly, like mic drop in that statement alone is like we need to really recognize if we're triggered by a partner or somebody we're dating and they're, not treating us right. Okay, what in you is allowing that treatment? And
Yep.
so this is where we'll go impact unpacking that. But first, I want to talk about, since you speak so highly on, and this was your discovery as well, is the attachment styles. And I know there's four main ones. I would love if you could walk us through it so people could deeply understand, or a glimpse of understanding, because I know we could go into a whole topic in that in itself, but understanding the four main ones and then how this plays a part really in our partners we attract or what we allow and what happens in us based on our attachments. Loaded question.
Absolutely. So the attachment styles, attachment theory is something that was really kind of discovered in the 70s. It's still relatively new when we think about, I mean, yes, 50 years. I can't believe I'm saying that. 50 years, it's 2024. But it's not like it hasn't been since Freud. It's not something that's thousands of years old. And essentially what they started to discover was the connection, the attachment you have to your caregivers will ultimately impact the attachment you have in your relationships. And so there are four main ones. Then of course there's always these like there's the this and the this, and I'm like, let's stop muddying the waters. Let's talk about the main four, and I'm going to make it pretty simple. So there's the secure attachment, which we all want to get to, and realistically speaking, there's not as many. Like the book Attached claimed 50% of people were attached, and Amir Levine, the author, came out and he was like, gravely overestimated. He was like, it's not 50%. But nonetheless, what does a securely attached person mean? That means that they have a high sense of self and a high sense of others. So they can co-regulate, meaning that they can co-create with somebody, but there's an interdependence and an independence. So they understand that I can be with my partner and I can share and I can have because I feel safe and secure to do that. And then if my partner leaves, that's totally okay. So those are people that were in a household growing up of potentially, you could have 1 to 2 parents that validated their experiences, that were there for them, that attuned to their needs. And sometimes it's so subtle, the amount they've actually even started to discover that it's within the first 12 months that could be the determining factor for your attachment style. So if you have and they did a whole study where they had a child sit in the chair and they had the parent look away, and you could see the kid, either if the kid would look at the parent and try to get the parent's attention, and when they wouldn't, they would start to get really upset and scream, anxious. They would start to do protest behavior to get the parent's attention. Or if they didn't, you would see they'd get upset and then they would just shut down. Avoidant, they would turn inwards. So we started to see even something that simple of your parents not looking at you as a kid, as a child, your caregiver is literally your lifeline. You have no other way of surviving if your caregiver leaves you. So the problem is, though, that then we have the amygdala in the brain, and the amygdala being all the way at the back of the brain, kind of in the middle, that stopped forming it when you're 6. That is responsible for emotions and feelings. So we can imagine that when that's growing and then it stops growing at 6, so whatever, it's almost like arrested development. It holds on to anything you've experienced, and it's called egocentric age, meaning as a child, your brain is not developed enough to be able to say, oh, like for me, oh, my father's a raging narcissist and my mom's a people pleasing. She doesn't set boundaries, and my dad just walks out because he has no capability of handling someone else's emotions. Yeah, that took me 30, almost 34 years to figure out. As a 4-year-old, all the cognitive ability is, what did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? Because the child can only handle and sees it as, I must have done something wrong. My parents are angry at me. It's because of me. So that's how our core beliefs start to get ingrained. So secure, we're all hoping and wishing that we can get there. Then you have anxious attachment. Anxious attachment is low sense of self, high sense of others. So we think about it, putting people on the pedestal. Okay, I need your validation. I need you. So if you had a parent, like for me, my dad was always in and out. You never knew when he was going to be back, to the point of when I was a kid, my mom said I would cry so much I would throw up. That was the running joke. And then when I finally asked her, well, what happened before I would throw up? And she said, your father would put you in the crib. And I was like, I would cry so much for his attention that the only way I could get anybody to come get me was to throw up. Then my mom would come in. So I always felt like my dad was never going to come back for me. That was literally my anxiety. So I didn't trust myself. That's where the anxious attachers, constant need, like hypervigilance, always scanning for safety, always hypervigilant, walking on eggshells, never knowing, people pleasing, trying to manipulate yourself to make the other person comfortable, because your goal is, if they're comfortable, I'm comfortable. Then we have the avoidant attachment style, which has been so villainized for so long and so unnecessarily. The avoidant attachment style is low sense of others, high sense of self. What they were taught was, it's not safe for me to have emotions. So like my sister, super avoidant. That's because my dad would slap her in the face every time she would cry when she was a kid. So she learned, emotions aren't safe. I cannot express myself because if I do, I'm in danger. And so they shut down. So when it gets overwhelming and so an anxious attacher has a deep, deep fear of abandonment. An avoidant attacher has a deep fear of rejection. If you don't like me, then you're going to punish me. So that's why a lot of avoidants can be perfectionist. Okay, I have to do better because if I'm perfect, then my parents will love me. Right. Or I only do well, so I get the accolades when I'm a good athlete. So they'll go, but they have no capabilities for emotions because their parents may have only given them accolades when they did well. But there was no space. So like if you grew up in a home with emotionally unavailable parents who never said, I love you, or never showed emotions, then yeah, as an adult, you're going to struggle to do that because no one taught you that.
Right.
So that's why a lot of avoidants are incredibly successful. They'll pour themselves into their work because they say, well, I have high sense of self. I know I can only rely on me. It's a protective mechanism. That's why there's no one right or wrong. Anxious people, they claim, oh, well, at least I express myself. It's like, you're not. You're projecting your insecurities onto somebody. You're just protesting. The avoidant gets overwhelmed and shuts down. So that's where that dynamic happens. Then we have the disorganized, which is that amalgamation of that anxious avoidant. That personally, and like what I've spoken to with a lot of people, is kind of, if you want to look at the worst of them all, it's its own kind of hell because it's a low sense of self and a low sense of others. So they want the love. I've dated somebody that was disorganized and it was a roller coaster. They want the love and they come close and then they get so terrified of, oh my God, but they're going to hurt me. No, I don't deserve this. I don't have, who am I? They retreat. That ping pong, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That is, again, low self-esteem and insecurity because that's prevalent in a lot of homes of abuse. Think about your caregiver, the one that you love, that you want for safety, is also the one that inflicts pain on you, whether that be emotional or physical. So that's where that becomes where you want it, but then you know that you're going to get in trouble, so you retreat. And so the reason that we look at attachment styles is not to diagnose other people. If I hear one more fucking person say, my avoidant, it's like, no, you are not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a coach. You are not anybody that understands the nuances to diagnose. My narcissist. No, you don't know what that means. Instead, we look at this for ourselves and we understand attachment style for me to go, okay, I'm incredibly anxiously attached, which means I look for validation. I seek that. That means in those moments when I want to text that person, I need to stop and say, what are my needs right now? Okay, I'm anxious. Why am I? What is my anxiety right now? I'm scared they're going to forget about me. Okay, so it's a fear of abandonment that they didn't text me. That's on me. It's not so, well, he's avoidant. So now I need to manipulate myself so that that's not why we're learning this.
Oh, so good. So good. I thank you for walking that very thoroughly through and also giving examples. So I imagine anybody listening right now will really maybe relate to some of those by the examples she shared. But I do think is there some quizzes you recommend, or what's the best way to find out which you truly are to really crystallize it? What would you recommend?
So personally, I got the book Attached, and there's a quiz in there. I found it to be the most accurate because Amir Levine really spearheaded normalizing this and making it more mainstream. Now, could you Google an attachment style quiz? Absolutely. And you want to remember, you want to answer it honestly for where you are now. It's not about, oh, in the past I used to do this. It's like, no, because the beautiful thing is, attachment styles are a spectrum. So not everybody, just because you're anxious doesn't mean it's going to show up the same. Like my partner is more avoidant and I'm more anxious. His avoidance doesn't mean that he'll shut down when I bring something up. What his is he doesn't like to talk about emotions and feelings. It's uncomfortable for him. So he just doesn't share. He'll just sit in silence. So if he's hurting, if he's struggling, he's not going to be the person that reaches out. If I ask him a question, there might be a little hesitancy, but he'll answer. He has no problem with that. Other people that have severe avoidance, the second you even say, hey, can I talk to you about something? Right. They see it as, I fucked up. I've let this person down. I'm a failure. I can't do this. And that's why they'll remove themselves. I can't do this. Same with anxious. If we watch Love is Blind, there is severe anxious attachment with Chelsea where you're just like, this is palpable. Like all you're doing is self-sabotaging, or I like to say self-protection. All you're doing is using protective mechanisms to keep yourself safe, which aren't anymore. And then there's people like me who just have a slight bit of anxiety, but in my relationship, I'm very secure. I've never second guessed my partner. And, I don't need that constant reassurance. Like I know my partner's there. So I always like to preface that there is a spectrum and you can heal through it. I used to be so anxious, I couldn't function in a day, to where now I don't even look at my phone for 4 hours because I'm just not even thinking about it. You can heal through it as you heal through your shit that caused you to have that attachment style.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Thank you for that. So also, I think this is just learning more about it myself listening and prep for this interview, and also listening to some other people talk about the attachments, I think it's so important if you're becoming a mom, or you are a mom or dad, sorry, want to include the men in here. I think it's important to learn about these attachment styles, because how you as a parent could help avoid creating, possibly, anxiety and emotional avoidance and all these issues that possibly will influence their children. I think it's never too late. Unfortunately, I know that, of course, like you said, it forms at a very early age. But I do think as we do this work in our life, like if you prepare and teach your children, and also how are you showing up as a parent to that. So I think it's so critical as I'm learning about it. I want to talk about the insecure attachments a little bit. What do you feel is like what's a common through line between all the insecure attachments?
Fear. That's the baseline. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, there's a deep rooted fear, because like, and I couldn't agree more. Like my client that I was talking to earlier, she's going through that with her son right now. She's feeling her anxious attachment. She's like, fuck, I see my kid is starting to have that. And we've been talking about, like, I'm like, okay, let's think about when you were a kid and you were going through these struggles, what did you need? And she was like, I just needed somebody to tell me that, like, it's okay to feel this and that I'm okay. And I was like, great. So now implement that on your child.
Yeah.
When you see that your kid is stop them and say, hey, I just want to remind you, I love you and I am here for you and I choose you every day. You don't have to be perfect. And that's okay if you think you do, but I'm here to remind you that no matter what, I'm going to be here for you. Talk to me. How do you feel? Are you okay? Something as simple as just talking to your child could literally change the trajectory, because when they get older and you're talking therapy like I am, and I look back saying, all I wish was that my mom had been there to tell me that it wasn't my fault, that my dad had his own issues and that it wasn't me. She didn't know. But now with the information that we have, it's so important. But really the deep rooted underbelly of everything is fear. It's a fear of abandonment is a fear of the future, of anxiety is a fear of the future. And then a fear of rejection is that you're going to be ridiculed and judged for who you are. And think about those people that have been, that's their number one fear, is always being found out or put down, or I'm not good enough. That all stems from whether you're hyper avoidant or hyper anxious or anywhere in between. That starts to happen when, where the work lies in there of accepting yourself, and not just bubble baths and face masks, but going back to those parts of yourself. Like I have multiple parts of myself from middle school and high school and elementary school that make me cringe when I think about them. But if I don't accept those parts of me, then I'm only going to be living in shame and blame, trying to hate myself through healing versus, wow, you know what? Here's a core belief. I'm too much. I speak too much. I'm too loud. I curse a lot. Okay, cool. Where did I learn that from? When I was a kid. Now, I'm in the public eye. I get that shit all day, every day. You need to stop doing this. I don't like that you do this. Prior to doing the work, I would have said, okay, I'll change. I'll do whatever you want. Now I say, here's the thing. You can go fuck yourself. I've accepted those parts of myself. I don't need to change because you're uncomfortable. What you need to do is keep fucking moving and find somebody else. I don't need to become what you want. You need to learn to accept people or move on, because you also have a choice.
Yeah. Oh, girl. It's so great. So I always share, like, I believe the pathway to self-love is radical acceptance, accepting all those parts of you, the things you've failed at, the things you have shunned, the things you feel you did wrong, and all these things. It's like when you come to that place of acceptance, like, this has been my journey, this has led me to where I am today, and to accept the trajectory you've been on, and now you have a different choice of how you could choose to be going forward. Like, if you choose to change certain things that aren't serving you, then choose that. And like, how can we walk down that path more in radical acceptance and loving of who we are, and it truly is a choice. Like you said, it's like you choose to be who you are. If you talk fast and if you swear or whatever, that, like, you feel that's who you are, you're passionate or whatever it may be. Not everybody's going to love, every part of us, but that's okay. That means we're not meant for them, but we're meant for somebody else, and that's okay. And so I love that you talk about that acceptance piece, because I think that is super, super key. So going into the inner child work a little bit, and really it's coming back to calming our nervous system, because as you talked about, the anxiety and fear is the common denominator between those insecure attachments. So you talked early on about some of the things you did to help regulate you, tapping, ketamine. What would be some other things that you provide to your clients for calming their nervous system in those times that, as I spoke about, a lot of people don't even recognize some of their like that they're being triggered without that radical honesty, like, hey, oh shoot, I was triggered. Now, how could I prevent that from happening again? So what would you recommend?
The first thing I always recommend, because it's like there's two different things. So it's like there's regulating your nervous system on just like a day-to-day, maintaining it. So it's like working out, going for walks, getting sunshine, getting enough water. Those are just baseline. Eating good food, like those are baseline. Like I work out 5 days a week for my mental health. Like it's for me to move my body, to help me. I do my red lights treatment. Like I love my Mito red lights so much. I do stretching on it. Those are things that, and I'll meditate while I do that. That's for me day to day of just keeping myself equilibrium, safe. Okay, you're okay. But in those moments, we just have to look at it as when you're triggered, and then you start to feel like there's a few steps here, because the reality is if you're so disconnected, like I was like that for years, I didn't understand what my anxiety even felt like in my body.
Yeah.
It wasn't until, no joke, my father came in December. I hadn't spoken to him for 2 years. That was the first time in my entire life that I noticed, oh my God, this is how my anxiety feels in my body. I was so disconnected for so long. And that's also why I continued with my partner, because I felt so good with him. I was like, I feel so calm, so safe, so relaxed. But when you're disconnected, like it took me a few years to understand dysregulation for me looks like when I feel triggered, my eyes start to dart back and forth. I start to get overheated because it's like, yeah, so what are my eyes darting back and forth? If there was a tiger that walked up right now while you and I were talking, I'd be scanning for safety. That's why your eyes are moving quickly, because you're looking for familiarity.
Mm.
So when you're triggered, all that means is to cue to your nervous system that you're in danger. Now, that could be, some people get a little triggered where you get a little and you're like, okay, that's all right, I'm good. Some people get so dysregulated that like they can't even get through their day, and it's just hell in a handbasket. So depending on where you fall, there, it's like a ladder. Ventral is safe, and that's at the top. If you move yourself down a ring to the ladder, if you go all the way down to dorsal, like shut down, so it's going to be two different coping mechanisms or regulation techniques. I apologize. So if you go all the way to dorsal, meaning you shut down, you barely can even, you have no energy, you're burned out. You just, like, I'm sure we've all been there. Someone says something to you and you just sit there like a 4-year-old with your eyes on the floor, and you're just, you have nothing to say. You can't even have the energy. When you're in those moments, doing even a little bit of light movement, sitting up straight, grabbing a cup of tea, getting a warm blanket or like something to wrap yourself in, doing a slight little bit of movement. What you're trying to do is, we look at it as you're moving yourself back up to the ladder. You need to mobilize your energy so that you can get your energy to get back to safety. Again, our nervous system was not designed for the digital world, so it doesn't understand any of this. It was designed for back in the day, hunting and gathering. Because back in the day, if your tribe excluded you and you were on the outside, you were dead. That was it. You were not going to survive. Nowadays, a guy breaking up with you, I'm sorry, you're not in a tribe. You're not going to die because of this. But the problem is your body thinks you're going to. So we have to remember. So if you shut down, your body's going into energy saver mode. That's the fawn or freeze phase of, fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. So when you go into that, it's about doing light little movements to bring yourself back up to have your mobilized energy. You get to safety. Versus if you go into that like parasympathetic or the sympathetic. I always fuck that up. I think it's a sympathetic. If you go into that middle one,
Parasympathetic is that rest and digest.
rest and digest, exactly. So that's ventral. So it's sympathetic. I always do that. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I
So
used to too.
if you go to sympathetic, which is that middle section, so we had dorsal all the way at the bottom. You remember we had to mobilize your energy to move back up and get to parasympathetic. If you're in the sympathetic, if you're in that fight or flight, that means you have so much pent up energy. You got to do something with it, right? Fight or flight. So in that mode, what I suggest is like, one time I had a troll that commented something negative and I started to punch the air. I literally fought this troll off. And I was like, see, okay, I'm safe now. You could do jumping jacks. You could do burpees. You could do the shakes where you literally shake your body. You could go grab 2 ice cubes that are in your hand. The point of regulating your nervous system is to mobilize that energy and to bring you back to the current moment. I keep sour candies all over my house. I have like a jar of them, because sour candy, it turns the prefrontal cortex on of your brain. And then all of a sudden you're in the moment. The point, going for a walk, doing something in a mindful walk where you scan from left to right and you start to look. If you scan slowly, you're scanning for safety and you start to notice your surrounding. Oh, wait, there's my brother. Oh, right. I'm in my house. What you're doing is you're bringing yourself back to the present moment. So when you feel wildly dysregulated, you go back to that 6-year-old or you go back to that child. You go back to that place because all your brain knows is, I felt this before. Here's how to keep them safe. It doesn't understand that now you're a 30-year-old woman who has credit cards and a choice and a life. All it knows is, I felt this when I was a kid. So we're going to go right back to it because it's trying to keep you safe. It's not trying to help you grow.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So good. You know what? I started using something called, I have it right here actually. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's the Apollo Neuro, and it
Mhm.
helps regulate your nervous system. So this creates, it's a wearable technology, and it has waves of energy that basically is simulating touch and calmingness that we feel
Yeah.
like, when we have a little puppy or we get a
Yeah.
hug. Or so this is actually a technology that was proven to calm your nervous system and handle those stressful moments. So I'm actually playing with it to calm my nervous system, you know, and kind of see how it's changing things. It helps with sleep and calm, and also regulate your HRV and all these things. Anyways, I'll plug that in the show notes because I think wearable technology could help you in the process of calming your nervous system as well. But
Totally.
so helpful. So I would love to, because I want to make sure we get in this episode, because this is your specialty, is dating and really coaching people of how to enter dating, how to, be mindful of how you're showing up in the dating process. So I think that's super key. And I've been out of the dating thing for, I don't know, it's been over 5 years. Luckily, recently engaged, which I haven't even announced it to my audience. But so I've been out of it for some time, but I know dating apps are still in. Who knows what else? You'd be more familiar with this just because the work you do today. But I want people to, if there's somebody listening that is wanting to change their patterning, become more aware, and really take ownership of how they're showing up, but also having grace through the process, as we kind of talked on earlier, what do you feel is like the first step we should take to really be radically honest with ourselves, get more clarity of, what we need and want in a relationship? Because, this is kind of a loaded question, but I think so many people recognize all the stuff they want in a relationship, but yet they don't really focus on what they really need. And that comes down to really our attachment styles based on all you've talked about today. So if you could, that's kind of a loaded question, but however you would like to kind of kick it off, of how to prepare ourselves to enter the dating world, but also be able to attract a healthy partnership if that's the wish we have.
So the reality is, and like, I love that you're even talking about wearables. I'm so here for it. Like, I love anything that, because it activates the vagus nerve, and that's how you're going to calm. You can sing, you could do so many, like you said, hug a puppy, you could do so many things. I love it. When it comes to entering the dating world, and also congratulations, yay, we love
Oh, thank
love.
you so much.
Of course. So when it comes to that, it's like, even a good first step is like, well, what is it that I want in a relationship? And then what have I been accepting? Like, even just the putting, like, I journal. I used to journal like all day. I don't need you to necessarily go through and read your journal every single day, but just getting it from here onto paper is scientifically proven to help you start to understand things a little bit differently. So I start to look at, okay, you want this secure relationship and you want someone that makes you feel seen, heard, and understood and all this. But then what are you continuing to date? Emotionally unavailable, blah, blah. Okay, so then that means if I'm looking at that list, what's the pattern here? I don't set boundaries. Okay, that's an area of opportunity that I need to work on. My expectations are wildly unrealistic. I think that every person needs to do. Okay, cool. That's something that we need to work on. It's about taking a flashlight to look at yourself and say, it's not about blaming yourself. It's not about shaming yourself. And it's not about negative self-talk. It's about being really fucking realistic with yourself. Like, when I was doing that for myself, I said I wanted all these things and I was like, but yet I'm going after this person that is coming on really strong and love bombing me because I have no patience, and I'm insecure because I'm scared that I'm always going to be left. So that meant I needed to fill my own cup up. That meant, okay, then while I'm out there dating, if my life is revolved around dating, my mom has been saying it, in addition to, not instead of, If my life is revolved around dating, that's the first fucking problem, because
Yeah.
then everything becomes about my self-worth is tied to the fact that this is going to happen in this. Do you need to be saved? Only you're going to be able to do that for yourself. So I
Yeah.
think it starts with a really honest look, and like a neuropsychotherapist I love, Britt Frank, she always says, turn your inner monologue into an inner dialogue. Talk like you would to a friend. So when you're writing, Sabrina, you expect everybody to text you every single day, otherwise you write them off. Okay, cool. That's not something that I would want to have in my relationship, because my expectations seem like they're unrealistic, because then I'm always disappointed. Okay, so how can I manage that? Maybe then what I can look at is, do I need that? What do I actually need in a relationship versus what do I want? What do I need? My intrinsic needs. I need honesty. I need transparency. I need thoughtfulness. I need consistency. I need reciprocity. Then, as I date, because here's a reality, you're going to get triggered. You could think that you are so cool, calm, collected, and I am so good on my own. The second you get out in a dating world, all of those shadow parts are going to come out.
Yes.
So I think it's also an acceptance of, yeah, I'm going to get triggered when I date. It's not going to be a walk in the park, but do I have the tools that I need in order to handle this? If the answer is no, go get a therapist, go to get a coach, talk to somebody that can teach you the tools. If you're looking and saying, every time I date, if I don't hear from the guy, I have a panic attack and then I'm crying and then all this, then I'm sorry, you are not in a position where you're going to be able to date effectively, because that's always going to be the driving factor. So it's also being understanding and honest of, do I have the tools I need to actually go out there and manage this? Or is this going to impact my self-esteem so heavily that it's going to set me back? Then that's me also knowing, maybe I just take a month and maybe I work on some of those things so that when I do get back out there, I feel a little bit more confident in myself that no matter what, I'll be okay, because I know what I need to do.
Yeah. I always like to say, like, or at least this was partly what I recognized as, like, I had my list of, I wrote down not just the, superficial things I wanted, but also the things I needed. And then looking at that list, I'm like, okay, if I want this all in a partner, am I being
Yep.
that as well? And so
Yep.
I think what's so, so key is, like, if you want this out of a partner, are you being this too? Like, are you embodying this yourself? And I think this is so key, is like, if you want somebody that's respectful, are you being respectful? Do you want somebody
Yep.
that's compassionate and giving? Are you compassionate and giving? Like, you have to, like, for you
Yep.
to attract that, you need to become it first. And I think, like, how could you expect, like, you want somebody to respect you, but you're totally being you're disrespecting yourself. It makes no logical sense. So I know that was part of my work, because, like I said, one of my pain points, and the thing I actually hired a coach for the third time, mind you, because again, I was like repeating the same pattern, went till it finally like knocked me over the side of the head. Like, you need to do the work. Then I started to recognize and take the ownership for what was I playing in this whole pattern repeat, and
Oh, yeah.
that's when it really landed, and that's when I really started to realize, like, oh my gosh, I'm not respecting myself. I'm saying I have this self-worth, but I'm not showing up like I have my self-worth, because I wouldn't allow this. I wouldn't, I
Mhm.
would have more healthy boundaries. And so that's why this work is so important, to really pause and reflect on our how we're showing up, really, and how we're being triggered and why that's coming up. And again, not to shame yourself about it, but learn more about yourself, be curious and ask yourself. And I love journaling. Journaling is, like you said, it's definitely one of the best processes to understand yourself without just like freestyling it, like putting a journal prompt and freestyling it and just letting go.
100%. Like, I could not agree more. I remember there was a video I posted about my partner, and he was going through, his sister passed away a couple of years ago, and I didn't know that it was the anniversary. And so we were away, and I remember saying, like, he was being really weird. And I finally was like, babe, what the fuck is going on? And I kind of, like, I had to push a little. And then he finally expressed himself, and we talked to me, communicated. And I remember I shared that of, like, just because somebody is like a little bit more of what doesn't mean that they're bad people. He even said, he was like, I didn't know how to talk to you about it. And I'll never forget, so many people were like, wow, thank you for sharing this. like, it allows me to be more compassionate and show up for my partner. I'll never forget this woman said, I don't need to teach somebody how to learn how to communicate with me. They should know. And I was like, that's your fucking, there you go. That's exactly what you were saying. You're not showing up as the kind of partner you claim to want. So people need to read your mind. People just need to know. Everyone should just know how to communicate with you because Princess has walked in and said, this is how it should be. Instead, it's, okay, if I want someone that's going to be super communicative, guess how I need to show up? I need to communicate with them. If I want someone that's open and vulnerable, guess how I need to show up? Open and vulnerable. I need to be that version. And if I set boundaries, my partner sets boundaries, beautiful. Look at us now maintaining each other's boundaries. I could not agree more with you. It is so crucial to look. That's why I was saying, what is it that you want? And then what is it that you're getting? Where is the disconnect? That's usually where it is how you're showing up. Because if you show up in the way that you want other people to, here's a reality. You're going to have tons of people that won't work for you. I have been showing up this way for the last year of my dating. I changed the way I dated after this one guy like 2 years ago now, but with my partner. But I'll never forget. And I remember seeing guys and being like, yep, they can't handle it, or this is too much for them, or they're overwhelmed. And instead of being like, oh, because right, see, Sabrina, you're too much. I was like, cool, they're just not for me. These are not the people for me. They can't even communicate with me. And I'm being incredibly communicative and honest. Next. That's it. I didn't need to create any more of a narrative around it. I show up authentically. And if you can't, that's cool. You're not for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like the key point of this all is like being radically honest with yourself and owning your faults per se, and then being able to, with that acknowledgement and awareness, shifting again into something that serves you more. I would love if you could touch on a little bit, a common thing that's heard is the people pleasing, and how does somebody, because you hear a lot, I'm a recovering people pleaser, because so many people are people pleasers. It's like one of the most common things. So how does somebody change that way of being? Like, what do you think is getting in their way, or like, how could they shift into stopping that and really just not needing that validation from another?
So the reality is I had Maas Barker on the podcast yesterday to talk about this because it's such a hot topic. And it's like, he's talked about it. I love him. He's one of my favorite psychotherapists, but he talks about it and he says one thing that people don't like. And it's like, people pleasing can be very manipulative because you're not doing it because the other person, it's not benefiting the other person. You're doing it because you don't want to deal with the repercussions, or you want to make them happy, or you want to keep the peace, or you don't want to ruffle feathers. So it's coming from your need for safety, which is A-okay. But that's not how we get it. If your need for safety is contingent upon how someone else needs to feel, then that means it's not a safe space for you in general to be. Now, doesn't mean that your partner's not safe. That means that dynamic that's happening. And there's two ways to look at it. When you're a people pleaser, is what you're saying being hurtful or harmful? Big difference. Hurtful? It's going to happen. So if I say no and I hurt your feelings, okay, well, you'll move on, right? You'll be okay. Versus, am I being harmful? Am I forgetting things and then just being like, oh, whoopsie, self-care day? That's harmful to that person's mental health and self-esteem. So there's as a people pleaser, and like, trust me, my mom was one, so like I grew up with that. It took me a long time to learn that, yeah, I'm allowed to say no. I have every right to tell somebody that doesn't work for me, because here's the reality. I could people please and then I could make you happy, but then I'm self-abandoning and there's none of my wants, needs, and desires are met. Instead, with compassion and love, if someone says, listen, I'm only in town for one day, I have to see you that day. Listen, I'm sorry. I'm busy. You didn't make the plans with me ahead of time. Oh, but I'm only in town. Did that hurt them? Maybe. But they maybe also needed to learn a fucking lesson that you need to schedule that, like I said, 3 weeks ago, versus being harmful. Are you attacking this person? There's a very different experience. You're going to hurt people. Yeah. But you can do that with love and compassion. You don't have to do that to harm them and to fuck their mental health.
Yeah. I think that's so important to say. It's like honoring your boundaries is so key in recognizing like what will hurt you in the long run of saying yes to something. I had that experience recently where brought on me last minute that I need to hang out with my friend. And I'm like, I have a whole plan of a work day that I've set aside. I would be disserving myself and putting myself under more stress, more anxiety or whatever by saying yes to go hang out with a friend. I'm like, I can't do it. But then I got repercussion of that. Like, I'm not being like amenable and making it work. I'm like, why should I? I'm sorry. It's like, just as I honor the friendship, I need to honor myself. Like there has to be both, right? So it
If you're
doesn't mean
not
like, yeah,
if you're not hurtful now, it'll be harmful later. That's the
totally.
thing. It's if you're not going to hurt somebody now, then later you're going to, then it's like I see it with my sister. She like she didn't say no to something. And then it started to come back. And then we had a huge blowout. And I was like, if you had just hurt my feelings in the beginning and just said no, we wouldn't have gotten to this where we ended up getting into a physical altercation. She hit me.
Mm.
She's
Oh,
because she
goodness.
becomes a feral cat when she gets triggered. We've worked through it. I love my sister. We have our issues like anybody else. But nonetheless, like, and she to this day, she's like, fuck, you're right. Like, I need to start saying no. And it's okay because the reality is if someone like your friend is going to guilt you, I don't know that that's necessarily a friend I'd really want to have in my close
Yeah.
quarter, you know?
That's
Like,
when I start to distance myself
mm-hmm.
completely. Yeah. I don't like the pressure to hang out with somebody and for those people to not understand why I'm saying no and to honor that and respect that, like as I would somebody else. I think that's
Yeah.
it's so important. So I would love to kind of like wrap with the dating aspect. What do you feel is like the common problems you're seeing in dating today and the common thing that is coming up that people are struggling with that just by sharing with them today that they could change that?
I think honestly, like truthfully, what I see is like it's a lack of accountability. It's a lot of people either trying to take full ownership of everything, and you're like, whoa, the pendulum is swinging severely. And so it's either everything is my fault and I'm a piece of, and it's like, okay, well, no, we don't need to hurt ourselves, or it's men are trash or women are bitches or whatever. And it's like, what I really think needs to happen is people need to hold up a mirror for themselves because like that's it. Like I have so many clients where I've seen they'll walk into the door complete shells of a human, and then by the time we're done they're super empowered, they feel really great, and they've shifted their mindset. Because at the end of the day, you are the founder of your company hiring for the most important position, which is the CEO. So if I'm going to just, what, you think that somebody walks by my house and says it's pretty and I just throw the keys to them? Who the fuck are these people? Are you kidding me? Like if I'm bringing you into my life, you need to be vetted. I don't care if you choose me. I care if I choose you. And I think it's really a lack of empowerment. And what I see it is that a lot of people regress. And I think it's just you go right back into I'm a 6-year-old child that people like I get every day dozens of questions that come in. And it's usually this person did all of these terrible things to me. Terrible. What do I do? And people forget when you're 6 years old, you don't have a choice. You're right. Your parents are treating you like shit. You have to create coping mechanisms to survive. You're not there anymore. You're
Right.
not there anymore. You get a choice now. You get to decide, hey, that doesn't work for me. Fuck you. Get out of my face. I don't need that. So I think really working on the mindset is such a big aspect. Like if you're coming in with scarcity mindset, it's one mind shift away from abundance. And it doesn't need to be inauthentic, but I think taking some accountability of like, yeah, I can't always blame everybody else. No, it's not that it's not that nobody wants relationships anymore. It's that I keep going after people that show me they don't want relationships, which reaffirms my core beliefs that I'm not good enough, thus keeps that narrative that nobody wants a relationship because it keeps you in that victim mode.
Mm.
And that is okay if that's where you're at. But if you want to get out of that, that's why I trigger a lot of people. I know it. I say things that people get volatile. And then a few months later, they'll
Wow.
come back and be like, man, I was angry
You're
with
right.
you, but it wasn't you. It's what you said that evoked within me. And it's like, that's okay. I will hold so much space for that. I just don't appreciate when people will put you down. That's not appropriate. You can be angry. You don't need to be a shithead. But I think really the biggest issue with dating is a lack of accountability and really a lack of introspection. And it says, stop diagnosing people. That's also a thing. Stop diagnosing people.
He's a
You met
narcissist.
somebody. Exactly. Oh my God. It's like, no,
That's
that
like the
person,
common thing.
everyone's a narcissist. And you're like, just because they're self-centered does not make them a narcissist. Like I
Right.
had a father that was one and I was married to one. You know the difference. And I think it's just stop putting it on everyone else. And instead, every time it's they're this, what does that say about me?
Mm. Oh, thank you for that. So good. So good. Okay. So I'm going to ask you the question I ask all my guests. And, maybe it might be the same things you've said. I don't know. But I think I'm curious what you'll say because since you have Do It the Work podcast, I have a feeling you might say something that we haven't talked about yet. But if you were to share a piece of wisdom, a life lesson that you've learned along this journey, and you just feel it's something you need to shout out to the world today, what would that piece of wisdom be and why?
I'm just going to say what the first one that came to mind. Your value is not determined by if you go to a coffee date or if you go to a dinner date or the job you have or the fact that you're single. Your value comes from who the fuck you are intrinsically, your core beliefs, and your value comes from your morals, ethos, and ethics. So if you don't stand for something, you fall for everything. Stop allowing other people to determine who the fuck you are. It is okay. You're going to lose people in life. You're not dating your mother or father. These are just random fucking people that you met on the internet. Get very comfortable disappointing people. My mama said you can please some of the people some of the time, but you cannot please all of the people all the time. You don't like everybody, so stop trying to get everyone to like you.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much. I love this conversation. I could talk to you for a whole day. I mean, I love this juiciness, and there's so many facets of this, and how I mean, relationships are the biggest trigger, to be honest. I mean, they really are. So there's a lot to unpack with this. But Sabrina, I just thank you so much. So if you could just give a shout out to where people could best find you and follow, and of course, everything will be in the show notes as well.
Of course, yeah. My new website, sabrinazohar.com, finally, or sabrina.zohar on TikTok and Instagram, if TikTok is going to live around, and Do the Work Podcast on Instagram, and of course, Do the Work Podcast wherever you find your podcasts.
Amazing. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I just adore you. And I love who you are. Honestly, like I could just see like such an authentic human in front of me, and that is just so radically you. And I think that is so beautiful. And so for all the haters out there, or the people that are like, trying to attack you, like whatever, again, like we're not for everybody. We're not everybody's cup of tea. So I thank you for this time. So valuable.
Thanks for having me, Erica. It was great to be on.